Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I never thought I'd be the type of person to get into a war with my HOA. I'm pretty much the definition of a rule follower. I keep my lawn neat, my house painted, and I actually read the community guidelines when I moved in 3 years ago. But sometimes even the most reasonable people get pushed too far. My neighborhood is one of those mid-level suburban developments where the houses are nice enough that people feel important, but not so expensive that anyone's actually wealthy. The kind of place where retired folks move to feel like they're living in luxury, and younger families stretch their budgets to get into the good school district. Most of my neighbors are decent people just trying to live their lives, but unfortunately, our HOA board had other plans. The board was run by two people who treated our little neighborhood like their personal kingdom. The president was this woman in her 60s who had clearly never worked a day in customer service, because she had zero concept of how to talk to people like human beings. Everyone called her the neighborhood enforcer behind her back. The vice president was her sidekick, a guy who worked in middle management somewhere and seemed to think that gave him authority over everyone else's lives too. These two had been running the HOA for about 4 years, and during that time, they'd managed to make life miserable for anyone who dared to question their decisions. They'd fine people for having their trash cans visible from the street for more than 6 hours after pickup. They'd send violation notices for lawn clover. They'd even tried to ban children's chalk drawings on sidewalks because they were deteriorating the aesthetic standards of the community. But their latest scheme was what really got me involved in this mess. About 6 months ago, they decided the neighborhood needed landscape standardization to increase property values. They hired this cut-rate landscaping company to handle all the common areas and to advise homeowners on bringing their yards into compliance with new aesthetic standards they'd apparently made up. Here's where it gets interesting. The landscaping company was owned by the vice president's nephew. Not his son, mind you, but his nephew, which I guess was supposed to make it less obviously corrupt. The company had been in business for less than 2 years and had exactly 3 employees, including the nephew. Their equipment looked like it came from a garage sale, and I'd seen them using a pickup truck with a trailer to haul away yard debris instead of proper commercial vehicles. When they first proposed this contract at a community meeting, I was one of the few people who spoke up against it. I did my research beforehand and found out that this company wasn't even properly licensed for the type of work they were proposing to do. They had a basic landscaping license, but not the permits required for drainage work, tree removal, or anything involving property modifications near foundation lines. I brought all this information to the meeting, printed out, and highlighted. I explained that hiring an unqualified company could void our community's insurance coverage if something went wrong. I suggested we get bids from at least 3 licensed contractors before making any decisions. You'd have thought I suggested we burn down the clubhouse. The president went on this whole speech about how I was being obstructionist and preventing progress. The vice president accused me of having a personal agenda against improvement. They acted like asking for proper licensing and insurance was some kind of outrageous demand. In the end, they pushed the vote through anyway. Most of the other homeowners just wanted the meeting to end, so they voted yes without really understanding what they were approving. The contract was signed, and the nephew's company started working on common areas the next week. I'll admit, at first I was smug about being proven right. The company immediately screwed up the irrigation system in the main entrance landscaping. They planted bushes that weren't suited for our climate zone. They used the wrong type of mulch and killed half the existing flower beds, but the board just made excuses and said they were working through initial challenges. I figured as long as they stayed away from private property, I could live with watching them destroy the common areas. I was wrong. 3 months after they started working, I had to go out of town for a long weekend. My wife's sister was getting married about 4 hours away, and we'd planned to stay through Monday to help with cleanup. It was supposed to be a relaxing family weekend, the first real break I'd taken from work in months. We left Friday morning, and everything was normal. My backyard was exactly how it had been for the past 3 years, since I'd had it professionally landscaped. I'd invested about $15,000 in a proper drainage system because our lot was at the bottom of a slight slope, and water would collect during heavy rains. The system included French drains, proper grading, and a series of decorative rock channels that directed water away from the foundation. The centerpiece of the whole setup was this Japanese maple tree that cost me $3,000. I'm not usually the type to spend that much money on a single plant, but this tree was special. It was about 12 feet tall, perfectly shaped, and it turned the most incredible shade of red in the fall. I'd researched Japanese maples for months before buying it, and I'd had a certified arborist help me choose the perfect location where it would get morning sun but be protected from harsh afternoon heat. When we got home Monday evening, I immediately knew something was wrong. The first thing I noticed was that our gate was open. We always kept our backyard gate latched, and I distinctly remembered checking it before we left. But what I saw when I walked around to the back of the house made my stomach drop. My entire backyard looked like a construction site. There was mud everywhere. Heavy equipment had driven over my lawn, leaving deep tire ruts that had turned into muddy ditches. But that wasn't even the worst part. My drainage system was completely gone. $15,000 worth of professional work had been ripped out and thrown into a pile next to my fence. The French drains were destroyed, the grading was ruined, and the decorative rock channels had been scattered across the yard like someone had used them for target practice. And my Japanese maple tree was lying on its side next to the debris pile, its root ball exposed and dirt scattered everywhere. $3,000 worth of carefully nurtured tree dead. I stood there for probably 10 minutes, just trying to process what I was seeing. My wife came out to see what was taking me so long, and when she saw the backyard, she actually started crying. That tree had been her favorite part of our landscaping. She'd taken dozens of photos of it every fall when the leaves changed. I spent the next 2 hours documenting everything with photos from every possible angle. I measured the tire tracks, photographed the damaged drainage components, and took close-up shots of the dead tree. I was operating on pure shock and anger, but I knew I needed evidence of what had happened. The next morning, I called the HOA management company first thing. The woman who answered the phone seemed genuinely confused when I described what had happened. She said she'd never heard of any authorization for work on private property and suggested that maybe it was some kind of mistake. But when I asked to speak to the board president directly, the tone changed completely. The management company rep said she'd pass along my concerns and that someone would get back to me. Nobody called that day. Wednesday morning, I decided to take a more direct approach. I knew where the board president lived, about 6 houses down from mine, so I walked over and knocked on her door. When she answered, I could tell immediately that she knew exactly why I was there. She had this smug little smile on her face, like she'd been expecting this conversation and was looking forward to it. I started by explaining what I'd found when I got home Monday, but she cut me off before I could finish. She told me that the HOA's landscaping contractor had reported non-compliant drainage work that was interfering with natural water flow to community areas. According to her, my drainage system had been installed without proper permits and was creating runoff problems for neighboring properties. I asked her who had authorized work on my private property while I was out of town. She said the board had determined that immediate action was necessary to prevent potential foundation damage to adjacent homes. I asked her why I hadn't been notified beforehand, especially since they clearly had to enter my locked backyard to do this work. She said they'd attempted to contact me but couldn't reach me, so they'd proceeded under the emergency provisions in the HOA bylaws. This was obviously complete nonsense. They had my phone number, my work number, and my email address. I'd been checking messages all weekend and hadn't received any attempts to contact me. But when I pointed this out, she just shrugged and said their records showed they'd tried. Then I asked about the Japanese maple tree. Why had they destroyed a tree that had nothing to do with drainage? This is where she got really nasty. She told me the tree was non-native landscaping that violated community aesthetic standards and had to be removed as part of bringing my yard into compliance. I asked her what community aesthetic standards required destroying a perfectly healthy tree that had been growing in my yard for 3 years without any previous complaints. She said the standards had been updated as part of the landscaping contract, and all homeowners were responsible for compliance regardless of when their landscaping had been installed. By this point, I was getting really angry, but I was trying to stay calm. I asked her what she planned to do about compensating me for the $15,000 in damage to my property. That's when she dropped the bombshell that really set this whole thing off. She looked me right in the eye and said that it was my word against theirs about what had been in my backyard before. Her exact words were something like this. She said their contractor had reported that my yard was an eyesore and potential hazard that needed immediate attention. She said unless I could prove that the HOA had authorized work on my property, which I couldn't, then I had no recourse. Then she hit me with a $500 fine for illegal landscaping modifications and non-compliance with community standards. I was so angry I could barely speak. I asked her if she was seriously trying to fine me for landscaping that her own contractor had destroyed. She said the fine was for allowing non-compliant landscaping to exist in the first place, and that the removal work had been done at community expense to resolve my violation. I told her this was completely insane and that I'd be contacting a lawyer. She just smiled and said I was welcome to try, but that the HOA's legal budget was significantly larger than mine, and that homeowners who fought the board usually ended up regretting it. I walked home in a rage. My wife could see how upset I was and suggested we start calling attorneys immediately. But I knew the board president was probably right about the legal costs. We could afford a lawyer, but not the kind of extended legal battle that HOAs are famous for dragging homeowners through. That's when I decided to try a different approach. Instead of getting emotional and fighting them head-on, I was going to use their own system against them. If they wanted to play games with paperwork and bylaws, then I was going to become an expert on paperwork and bylaws. I started by requesting a complete copy of our HOA's governing documents. This included the original CC and Rs, all amendments, the bylaws, and any rules or regulations that had been adopted by the board over the years. Legally, they had to provide these within 10 business days of any homeowner's request. While I was waiting for those documents, I did some research on HOA law in our state. I found out that boards have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the community, and that any decisions involving potential conflicts of interest have to be handled very carefully. Hiring your nephew's unqualified company definitely seemed like it could qualify as a conflict of interest. I also learned that most HOA governing documents have very specific procedures for authorizing work on private property. Usually there has to be advance notice to the homeowner, documentation of the emergency that justifies immediate action, and approval from either the full board or a supermajority of homeowners. When I got the governing documents, I spent an entire weekend reading through them. Most of it was standard legal language about dues and architectural guidelines, but buried in the bylaws was exactly what I'd hoped to find. Section 12 of the bylaws covered Emergency Maintenance and Repair Authority. It stated that the board could authorize immediate work on private property only in cases of genuine emergency that posed imminent danger to life, property, or community infrastructure. Any such work required certified mail notice to the affected homeowner at least 48 hours in advance, unless the emergency made such notice impossible. More importantly, all emergency work had to be performed by contractors who were properly licensed and insured for the type of work being done, and who appeared on the HOA's approved vendor list. The approved vendor list was supposed to be updated annually and made available to all homeowners. I'd never seen such a list, so I made a formal written request for it. 3 days later, I got a response from the management company saying that the current approved vendor list was under review and would be available soon. This was obviously stalling, but it confirmed my suspicion that the nephew's company wasn't properly approved. While I was waiting, I started investigating the landscaping company itself. Public business records showed that they'd been incorporated less than 2 years ago. Their business license was for basic landscaping and lawn care only, with no endorsements for drainage work, tree removal, or any type of excavation. More importantly, their insurance policy only covered basic landscaping activities. If they'd caused damage while doing work they weren't licensed for, their insurance wouldn't cover the claim. I also found out that the nephew had a history of problems with previous contracts. He'd been sued twice in the past year by other clients for property damage and incomplete work. One of the cases was still pending, but the really interesting discovery came when I submitted a formal records request to see all board meeting minutes and email communications related to the landscaping contract. Most HOAs try to avoid giving homeowners access to internal communications, but our state has pretty strong sunshine laws that require disclosure of most board business. They legally had to provide any documents related to decisions that affected community property or individual homeowners. It took them almost 2 weeks to respond to my request, which should have been a red flag. When they finally provided the documents, I could see why they'd taken so long. The meeting minutes from when they'd approved the landscaping contract were obviously edited. There were gaps in the timeline that didn't make sense, and several references to off-the-record discussions that weren't supposed to happen under our bylaws. But the email communications were where I hit the jackpot. The board president and vice president had been incredibly sloppy with their email security. They'd been using the HOA's official email account to coordinate with the landscaping company, and they hadn't bothered to delete any of their correspondence. The email chain started about 2 weeks before my trip out of town. The vice president had sent his nephew a list of properties that needed attention as part of the landscape compliance program. My address was at the top of the list, with a note that said, "Start here. Let's see if he likes his fancy garden after we're done with it." The nephew had responded asking about liability for working on private property without homeowner permission. The vice president had assured him that the board had full authority under emergency provisions and that he didn't need to worry about pushback. But the most damaging email was sent the morning I'd left for my trip. The board president had somehow found out I'd be away for the weekend, and she'd emailed the nephew telling him it was perfect timing to deal with my non-compliant landscaping situation. These emails made it crystal clear that the destruction of my property wasn't some emergency response or mistake. It was a deliberate retaliation for my opposition to their landscaping contract. Armed with this evidence, I started planning my counterattack. First, I researched the personal liability exposure for HOA board members who exceed their authority or act with conflicts of interest. What I found was very interesting. While board members generally have some protection from personal lawsuits, that protection disappears when they act outside their legal authority or breach their fiduciary duties to the community. By hiring an unqualified contractor with obvious conflicts of interest, and by authorizing work on private property as personal retaliation rather than genuine emergency response, they'd clearly exceeded their authority. More importantly, since the contractor they'd used wasn't properly licensed or insured for the work they'd done, the HOA's insurance policy wouldn't cover any damages. That meant the board members could be personally liable for the full cost of repairing my property. I decided to lay a trap for them. I sent a formal letter to the board requesting a mediation meeting to discuss the situation with my backyard. I said I was hoping we could reach a reasonable resolution without involving lawyers or insurance companies. I suggested we meet at the community clubhouse with a neutral mediator present to help facilitate discussion. What I didn't mention was that our state's laws allowed any party to record mediation discussions as long as they disclosed the recording beforehand. I planned to start the meeting by announcing that I'd be recording everything for my own records. The board agreed to the meeting, probably thinking they could intimidate me into dropping my complaints. We scheduled it for the following Saturday morning. I spent the week before the meeting preparing my presentation. I organized all my evidence into a clear timeline with photographs of the damage, copies of the emails, and documentation showing that the landscaping company wasn't qualified for the work they'd done. But I decided not to reveal any of this evidence until after I'd given them a chance to lie about what had happened. The meeting started with the board president acting like she was doing me a huge favor by agreeing to discuss the situation. She brought both the vice president and the nephew to the meeting, which was perfect for my purposes. I started the recording and announced that I was doing so for record-keeping purposes, which nobody objected to. For the first 20 minutes, I let them tell their version of events. According to their story, they'd received multiple complaints from neighbors about water runoff from my property. They'd tried repeatedly to contact me before my trip, but couldn't reach me. When the situation became an emergency, they'd authorized immediate work to prevent property damage to adjacent homes. They claimed the landscaping company had discovered that my drainage system was improperly installed and was causing foundation problems for neighboring properties. The tree had to be removed because its root system was interfering with the drainage repairs. They said they'd been as careful as possible to minimize damage to my property, and they were willing to help me file a claim with my homeowner's insurance to cover any cosmetic repairs needed. The nephew backed up their story, claiming that the drainage work in my yard was definitely not up to code, and that removing it had been necessary to protect the community. I let them talk for almost 20 minutes, asking just enough questions to get them to elaborate on their lies. I wanted everything on record. Then I started producing my evidence. First, I pulled out the photographs showing that my drainage system had been professionally installed and was working perfectly before they destroyed it. I had receipts showing the $15,000 cost and documentation that the work had been done by a licensed contractor with proper permits. The board president tried to say that the permits must have expired, but I showed her the documentation proving that drainage systems don't require renewal permits once they're properly installed. Next, I pulled out the business records for the landscaping company. I showed them that the nephew's business license didn't cover drainage work, tree removal, or excavation. I showed them the insurance policy that wouldn't cover damages from work they weren't qualified to do. The vice president started getting defensive, saying that licensing requirements were just bureaucratic red tape, and that his nephew was perfectly capable of doing the work. That's when I pulled out the emails. I read the entire email chain out loud, including the vice president's note about seeing if I'd like my fancy garden after they were done with it, and the board president's comment about perfect timing when she found out I'd be away for the weekend. The room went completely silent. The nephew actually got up and walked out, mumbling something about needing to get back to work. The vice president started to say something about the emails being taken out of context, but the board president shut him up with a look. I let the silence hang for about 30 seconds, then I explained their legal situation. I told them that by authorizing work on private property as personal retaliation rather than genuine emergency response, they'd acted outside their authority as board members. I explained that their personal liability protection didn't apply when they breached their fiduciary duties to the community. I showed them the documentation proving that the landscaping company wasn't qualified or insured for the work they'd done, which meant the HOA's insurance wouldn't cover my damages. Then I presented my demands. I wanted $15,000 to restore my drainage system, $3,000 to replace my Japanese maple tree, and the immediate resignation of both the board president and vice president. I also wanted the landscaping contract with the nephew's company terminated immediately, and I wanted the HOA to hire a qualified contractor to repair the damage they'd done to the common areas. If they agreed to these terms within 7 days, I'd consider the matter resolved. If not, I'd be filing a lawsuit for the full damages plus attorney fees, and I'd be submitting a complaint to the state licensing board about the nephew's company working outside their licensed scope. The board president tried to bluster about how the HOA would never agree to such demands, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew I had them dead to rights. I packed up my evidence and left them to discuss their options. 4 days later, I got a call from the management company. The board had voted to accept all my demands. Within 2 weeks, I had a check for $18,000 to cover my damages and replacement costs. Both the board president and vice president submitted their resignations. The landscaping contract was terminated and the nephew's company was banned from doing any future work in the community. The new board, led by a retired engineer who actually knew how to read financial statements and legal documents, hired a legitimate landscaping company to repair the damage to the common areas. They also implemented new policies requiring board approval for any contracts over a certain amount, mandatory disclosure of conflicts of interest, and independent review of all vendor qualifications. My drainage system was professionally restored within a month, and I had a new Japanese maple planted in the exact same location. The new tree cost a bit more than the original, but the extra money from the settlement covered it easily. The really satisfying part came about 6 months later when I found out what had happened to the board president. She'd been forced to sell her house to pay for the legal fees and damages from my case. Turns out fighting HOA battles is expensive when you're on the losing side. The neighborhood is much more peaceful now. The new board actually focuses on maintaining property values and community amenities instead of using their positions to settle personal grudges, and I learned a valuable lesson about dealing with bureaucratic bullies. Sometimes the best way to fight corruption isn't with lawyers or loud arguments. Sometimes you just need to be patient, do your research, and let their own paperwork hang them. The moral of this story is simple. Never delete an email, and always read the boring bylaws. They're not just there to tell you what color your shutters can be. Sometimes they're there to tell you exactly how the people in charge have screwed up. My advice to anyone dealing with an abusive HOA: document everything, know your rights, and remember that board members are just neighbors who volunteered for a job they're probably not qualified for. Most of the time, they're counting on you to be too intimidated or too busy to fight back. But if you're willing to do the work and you have the evidence on your side, you can absolutely hold them accountable for overstepping their authority. Just make sure you're prepared for the long game, because these battles are won with persistence and preparation, not with anger and confrontation. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Back before cell phones and TSA checkpoints, I was working as an admin assistant. Ray was my department head and had a great sense of humor. When I was hired on, Ray made sure I understood that I worked for him. Even though I would do some office-wide work, he was my boss. Clint was in charge of another department in our office. Flying from our office to a satellite office for a day or two was common for people in both departments, and I was in charge of making standard pre-approved travel arrangements. If someone needed to change unexpectedly, they were supposed to handle those themselves. Clint seemed unable to understand that. At some point, Clint decided that he wanted to cut travel costs. Lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate for his department. Lowest possible fares were always the 5 a.m. outbound and 11 p.m. return flights. Clint didn't care. A couple weeks into this policy, Clint is headed to the satellite office for some in-person meetings. Game on, lowest possible fare, lowest possible rate. Clint left on the 5 a.m. flight. The lowest rate car rental company didn't keep their cars available at the airport. Clint had to take the shuttle to their off-site location to pick up his car. Sadly for Clint, the shuttle didn't start running until 8 when his first meeting was scheduled to start. Oops! The client refused to reschedule that day but agreed to the next morning. At some point it dawned on Clint that he either had to fly home and back or get a room for the night. He chose to get a room, and of course call me. One lowest possible rate room coming up. Unsurprisingly, that room didn't have security on site like he was used to. It did have little multi-legged friends, if his complaints were true. The next morning, Clint headed out, in the previous day's suit, only to discover that his car had been broken into overnight. The police took their time arriving, and by the time they were done, Clint had missed his meeting again. Somehow, Clint got the client to reschedule again, and he decided to take the flight home and back the next day. Of course, I was kind enough to remember the lowest possible fare rule, so Clint was booked on the 11 p.m. flights home and 5 a.m. return, even though his meeting was midday. This time, the lowest rate car was at the airport, so Clint got to skip the shuttle. Sigh, you can't win them all. At that point, Clint's lowest possible policy had already cost the company at least double what a normal trip would have. Not to mention all the time I had spent calling hotels, motels, and car rental companies. The next day, he's on the 5 a.m. flight and makes it to his meeting. I don't know when he realized that he didn't want the lowest possible fare at 11 p.m. I do know he decided to take the more expensive, earlier flight home both days. Somehow he discovered that he could change that himself. The next time I saw Clint, he tried to fire me. Too bad I worked for Ray, who knew and laughed about the whole thing. Clint was furious, but there wasn't anything he could do. The company would back Ray, and Ray was backing me. Clint changed the room rate policy because of his experience, but refused to rescind the lowest fare and lowest rental rate policy. That was until accounting let slip that not only had Clint figured out how to take the higher-priced earlier flight, he figured out an upgraded seat as well. Clint found himself with an entire department intentionally missing their 5 a.m. flights and rebooking for the more expensive 8 a.m., which somehow only had upgraded seats available every time. Rental car reservations were missed and more expensive cars were rented. Meetings that were previously in the office were somehow only available after hours, so clients were taken to dinner. Dinner included alcohol, so rooms were booked at hotels closest to the restaurants and returning flights scheduled for the next day. Less than a month later, all lowest price policies were rescinded. I was allowed to book normally again, and the missed flights, upgraded seats, and fancy hotels disappeared. Dinner meetings remained, but decreased dramatically. When I left, Clint's reputation still hadn't recovered. The next one is an entitled people story. Once upon a time, I was a property shepherd. Banks would foreclose on properties and assign our real estate office to nurse the houses through the pre-foreclosure, foreclosure, eviction, and post-eviction periods. Banks liked using realtors because we would essentially work for free. I did a lot of work, and our only payment was if we sold the property at the end and got a commission. No sale? The banks got a ton of free labor. There was a particular mansion, 8,000 square feet, membership rights to a private golf course. In a good market, it should be worth around $3 million, but during the foreclosure years, it was just under $1 million. The property was added to my list of around 900 assets at the time. Just another house, but a pretty good commission as a reward for taking so many of the not worth as much houses. So I go through the checklist I go through with every house. Make sure the city records list the right names and the right addresses. Make sure the house physically exists. In cases of fraud, occasionally they didn't. Make sure it hasn't burned down. Arson on houses facing foreclosure, eviction was not unheard of. Is it occupied? Is the yard maintained? Is water freely flowing out of the windows? Is there a foot-thick wall of ice turning an open porch into a tunnel? I have a deep sense of loss over not being able to find that picture. Any code violations? Is the HOA foreclosing themselves for unpaid dues? HOA foreclosures take precedence over bank foreclosures, and one of my assignments was taken away because the bank lost it. Nobody had checked for an HOA lien, so I started doing in on everyone. Plus a handful of other tasks. House was occupied. This particular one was well into the eviction phase, so I expected to have possession within a month. Easy peasy, except what should have been a quick assignment turned into 5 long years. For 5 years, I did weekly occupancy checks on that house. Drive by, take pictures documenting the condition, making sure it was occupied and maintained, keeping an eye out for code violations, keeping an eye out for HOA liens, occasionally delivering messages to the bank offering checks of up to $25,000 if they would waive eviction and just turn the house over to the bank, through me. Nope, it was their house. They were entitled to it. Nobody could make them leave, and their lawyer was making sure they didn't have to pay a dime for insurance, property taxes, or water sewer. The bank had to pay water, sewer, and the property taxes, so they didn't lose the house to the city, and the bank had to assume the full insurance risk because the occupants weren't paying. I asked my legal contact how this was dragging on for so long, and received an answer that it was technical, but basically the guy filed for bankruptcy, which automatically stays the eviction, and that takes a couple of months to work through the system. It would be discharged, so the eviction was back on, but then his wife would file for bankruptcy, he not being allowed to file bankruptcy until some waiting period. After her bankruptcy was discharged, he would file again. They went through a few cycles of this, but I was just the real estate guy. I didn't have a full picture of what was going on the legal scene. A couple of times I was told that an eviction was scheduled and to stand by with my locksmith and trash out crew, but each time they got a stay of eviction somehow, so it was canceled. One day their luck ran out. I was told to get over there, and as per standard procedure, the moment the bailiff told me he was done, secure the house. I arrive. There's about $200,000 worth of personal property already out on the lawn. I was ready to go. But then their lawyer came running up with a writ from the judge. The eviction was canceled, immediately. The bailiff collected his crew and drove away, and I watched the occupants start to move their property, slightly damp from the drizzle, back into the house. Now comes the part where their entitlement satisfactorily bites them hard. Yet another eviction date is scheduled. Me, doing my weekly occupancy checks, see no sign of packing up and preparing to leave. They fully expected their legal tricks to work yet again, but this time they didn't. The bank's lawyer told me the eviction was 100% definitely on. The moves that worked before were not in play this time around, so it was a firm and definite date. No ifs, ands, or buts. I do my weekly occupancy check on a Thursday and notice that there are a lot of people going in out of the house and a large garage sale sign in the yard. Open to the public. Well, I'm the public, so I went in to take a preliminary glimpse of the house to give me an idea of how many bathrooms and other sinks would need to be winterized, etc. Only to be met with price tags on everything. I mean everything. Every sink, toilet, bidet, light fixture, granite and marble countertops, oak and mahogany cabinets, pedestal sinks, bathroom sinks with marble tops with underlighting, even the solid oak doors on every bedroom and closet had price tags. Some fixtures were already gone. This is a 100% absolute no. Those fixtures belong to the bank, no question. They felt they were entitled to strip all 8,000 SQ feet as much as they could to get whatever cash they could, and they were about to do hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage to the house. I call the cops, explain that there is an impending eviction and the occupants are stripping the house. Fortunately, I was in a city where they cared, many didn't, so a squad car rolled up in just a few minutes. The guy in the dark uniform told the guy that this was not allowed, the sale was over, and he had to stop stripping the house. The former borrower swore that he had no idea it wasn't allowed and promised to stop. I didn't trust him, so the next day I felt the house needed an extra weekly check. Sign still up? People still going in and out of the house? Call the cops immediately, and they are out in a few minutes again. This time the cop is pissed. Ordered everybody except the owner and his family. The cop let me look around and I spotted several items missing, about $15,000 worth that I immediately identified. Cop said the ignorance excuse didn't work because he was told yesterday, and if there was anything else missing at the time of eviction, he was going to jail. Monday morning comes, time for the eviction. The house is empty of all personal property and missing a few of the fixtures. The bank, happy to be rid of him and not in the mood for yet another legal battle with him, and I think there were still some lawsuits over the house flying around, told me to just forget about it, inventory what was missing as best as I could, and proceed as normal. The bids to make the house livable came in at around $100,000, but the bank didn't want to bother. They sold the house for cash, as is, for $1 million, even within 3 days of it being listed. With the repairs, it probably would have gone for $1.2 million, so not really worth the time or effort. The next one is an entitled people story. My parents have a bit of an unusual marriage. My mom is an engineer, petroleum, and my dad is a stay-at-home dad. He didn't want to be. He wanted to be a writer, but he never made any money off that and had to stay at home to raise us because my mom was working all the time. He's unhappy staying at home to raise us because he feels less of a man, but he can't contribute any other way. My mom is resentful of my dad never contributing financially, and they now hate each other. They consider divorce a sin, but if they didn't, they would have divorced long ago. My girlfriend is a software engineer and very smart, and I hate to say it, but kinda reminds me of my mom. Very independent and straightforward, but not the nurturing type. She admits she wasn't unsure if she would be a good mom, until she got a dog and said he opened motherly instincts she didn't know she had. My parents live 8 hours away, so she and I went to visit them for the first time recently for the holidays. I told her about their unfortunate life circumstances, but told her not to mention it to them that she knows because my dad is embarrassed by it. At dinner, my dad asked my girlfriend if she knew how to cook and clean and if she knew how to take care of me. She said she did, but she expected me to do equal in the household, and he told her he didn't want his son marrying a strong woman. Different meaning in Mandarin, because they're not good at taking care of their husbands and only know how to make money. I agree it was insulting, but she took it too far by shooting back that at least she can make money and contribute financially to the household and not need her partner to be the breadwinner while hating them for it. My dad was stunned into silence, and then dinner got awkward. I got mad at her when we were alone, and she got mad at me, saying I didn't defend her, and she wasn't going to meekly let him bash her.
She said I failed to protect her against my dad and she was going to tell it like she sees it. I reminded her she wasn't supposed to say she knew my parents' situation, that I told her in private and made her promise to keep quiet, and she snarled back that it was payback for me not defending her. Of course, now she's made my dad hate her and didn't even try to make him get to know her. Comment said, "You the a-hole. I'm sorry your dad is miserable, but his life circumstances are his own fault. He picked a career he wasn't any good at, and instead of figuring out a new plan, he let himself get stuck in a role he resents. Instead of accepting this as his own fault, he is pushing your girlfriend into a sexist role, and she's having none of it. Good for her. You sound as cowardly as your father." Another comment said, "You the a-hole. That's on your dad for not divorcing or being resentful for feeling less of a man. You should not be letting him drag down other women because he hates his circumstances. If you keep defending him and his reasons, then your girlfriend has a red flag on her hands. She's being insulted for her choices in life. If you think that's okay, then you won't have much of a relationship. Your dad's issues are not her issues, and neither are yours. Where would your family be if your mother didn't become the breadwinner? Your dad provided for the family by being a stay-at-home dad. That has value. It's a pity he doesn't see it. Your dad needs help and needs to stop projecting his insecurities on others, and you should not be enabling him." The next story is titled, "Am I the a-hole for going to my friend's house when my wife told me to duck off?" Throwaway because I don't want my family members finding out my issues. My, 28M, wife, 27F, is 7 months pregnant. Since she's been pregnant, she's been having a go at me for small things, like if I don't make dinner for her or when I cook her the wrong thing. Before she was pregnant, she was never like this. She was always very sweet. Yesterday, my wife came back from her parents' house, and I made homemade pizza for us. She told me she doesn't want pizza and to cook her something else. I told her if it's quick and easy, I'll make it. She asked for homemade chicken dumplings. I told her I'm not making that because that will take ages. She told me she's pregnant and is craving dumplings. I told her, I know you're pregnant, but I'm not making dumplings for you. She started having a rage that I wouldn't cook her something. It was 6 p.m. at night. I'm not whipping out all these ingredients. I told her to make it herself or to not have anything. When I had my pizza, she was sitting on the couch sobbing, saying that I don't love her or the baby. I told her I'll make dumplings tomorrow night for her, but not tonight. She told me to duck off somewhere else. I asked my friend if I could stay the night with him, and he said yes. Packed clothes and slammed the door behind me. When I was halfway to my friend's, my wife texted me begging for me to come back, so I told her to duck off like she did with me. So, am I the a-hole? Comment said, not the a-hole. I've had 3 kids of my own. I've been around significant portions of the many pregnancies of my siblings, and yes, hormones are awful, but they do not give a woman a free pass to be abusive and then absolute immunity to repercussions. Maybe you could have worded your response better and told her that no, you weren't coming home because you needed time to cool off, but just because she's pregnant doesn't mean that you don't get to feel upset or hurt by her actions. The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for sitting on my husband's lap during Thanksgiving dinner because all chairs at the table were taken? I, F28, have been with my husband, Sean, M33, for 2 years, married for 5 months. Most of his family are decent people, but his mom can be a little bit of a passive-aggressive and tends to criticize me a lot. Sean sees it as her still not getting used to me being around, but I don't know because she treats his ex, Jalissa, good. Mother-in-law says that Jalissa has been around the family for ages, and her past with Sean never affected her relationship with her. Fine, I never minded her attending every holiday and being around till yesterday. We had Thanksgiving dinner at my mother-in-law's house. Sean went there before me, and when I arrived, it was already dinner time. Everyone was seated, and I saw that all chairs were taken. I asked mother-in-law why she didn't save me a seat, and she said sorry, and that one of her granddaughters decided to show up last minute and the chair was taken. I looked at her, then at Jalissa, who was sitting next to Sean, and tried to point out how I was more deserving of her chair since I'm the daughter-in-law. I know I shouldn't have said it, I know. Mother-in-law flat out said that Jalissa is as much family as me, and that it was rude to imply otherwise. Jalissa was nodding confidently while glancing at me. I was so upset I wanted to leave, but decided to just sit on my husband's lap and act as casual as possible. I sat on his lap asking if he was okay with it, don't worry, I'm petite, he's strong-built, and started eating so casually while smiling and complimenting the food and mentioning to Sean how warm and comfortable his lap was now and then. The table went awkwardly silent. Brother-in-law would try to break the silence and change the subject, but it somehow goes back to being awkward. Mother-in-law and Jalissa were barely eating and were staring at each other, then at me, eyes wide open. Minutes later, Jalissa excused herself to the bathroom, and so did mother-in-law. It was still awkward, but I did my best to focus on dinner. Sean was eating as well. Later, there was just so much tension, and mother-in-law was barely able to speak after Jalissa left. Early, like right after dinner. Sean and I went home, and mother-in-law tried calling, but then called Sean and texted me saying what I did was inappropriate, and that I ruined Thanksgiving dinner and made it awkward. She said it wasn't her fault chairs were taken, and I could have dragged a chair from the kitchen but acted childishly and made Jalissa and family uncomfortable with how inappropriate I was. Comment said, not the a-hole, but the whole ordeal could have been avoided had your husband done what he should have done and gave you his seat while he went to fetch another one. In fact, he should have already had an empty seat beside him waiting for you. I can't imagine putting my wife in such an awkward situation. Another comment said, your husband should have got up immediately and either fetched the chair for his wife or given you his while walking around, making it all as awkward as possible. Or he could have taken one of the empty chairs when the women went to the bathroom. Musical chairs could be the new family tradition. The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for leaving when my mom told me to move my car so her neighbor's daughter can park in her driveway? Some backstory, my mom has always wanted a daughter. Instead, she ended up with 2 sons and 6 grandsons. 16 years ago, a young woman with a 2-year-old daughter, let's call the daughter Lily, moved across the street from her. She was a single mom and didn't have any family in the area, so my mom offered to help take care of the little girl while her mom worked/studied. Over the years, she's become an adoptive mom/grandmother to this woman and her daughter. She was there when the woman married her husband and had 2 more girls together. She's very close to the whole family, but especially Lily. My mom was born and raised in Italy. My dad was French. My brother and I don't speak any French or Italian. Lily is not only fluent in French and Italian, but she knows more about the culture than me or my brother, and she knows all of my mom's recipes. My mom also helped pay for her private school tuition because she doesn't like the public schools in the area. Lily, my son, and my nephew graduated from high school in May. My son and my nephew each got a card and a check for $300. My mom took Lily to Europe for 8 weeks over the summer. I got to my mom's house with my sons last night. We planned on staying for a few days because we live 8 hours away. I was parked in the driveway, then right before dinner my mom told me I needed to move my car so Lily could park in her driveway. I said Lily could park on the street, but my mom said no, the driveway is Lily's spot and I have to move. So I told my sons to get our bags and we went home. My mom has been calling me since last night asking me to come back and saying I overreacted to being asked to move my car. I refused, and my sons and I are celebrating without her, but I'm starting to wonder if I was the a-hole for leaving when my mom told me to move my car. Comment said, not the a-hole. As we said around here, this isn't about the Iranian yogurt. This is a reaction to years of feeling second class to Lily because, as sons, you somehow did not fulfill your weird desire of your mom's preferred genitals. I'm sorry you've all felt this way for so long. It's hard to watch your mom seemingly show someone else more affection than they do to you. Have you ever actually laid it all out for her like you have here for us? Another comment said, not the a-hole. Was it extreme and not even about the spot? Absolutely. However, it sounds like your mom has favored some random human over you, so I'd probably harbor resentment as well. OP is just as valid as every other person that comes here and gets backed for being put second to a golden cold. If not more so. This isn't even her kid. The last story is titled, Am I the a-hole for refusing to stop saying my mother kidnapped my son? I, F, 32, emigrated to my husband's, 39, home country 5 years ago, and we have a beautiful son who is 3. My mother, 52, has always been controlling and frankly is a typical narcissist. She was dead against my moving, and was even more upset when I had my son as a combination of her husband being terminally ill in the pandemic. She couldn't meet my son until this week, and she's complained bitterly about how we cheated her out of her special time with her first grandson. I wasn't exactly excited about her coming to visit us, but my husband convinced me we should try to let our son have a relationship with her. Well, from the moment she arrived, she complained. Our house is too small, the garden is overlooked, etc. She complained my son doesn't speak much English and so she can't communicate with him. She complained that my son didn't want to hug her, that he wanted to stay with his paternal grandmother. My son spilt a drink and she shouted at him. We're taking the gentle approach, so I told her not to do that and why, and she lost it, telling me I have no idea how to raise a kid. I told her she needs to respect my methods or she can leave. She stopped, but the whole rest of the day you could tell she was furious. That night, my son was having one of those nights where he just isn't going to sleep through. My poor husband also had an IBS flare-up in the early hours, and we realized we had no medication. When my son settled at around 7:30 a.m., I decided to do a quick run to the 24-hour pharmacy to get some medication, leaving son and husband both asleep on the sofa. I was gone for 20 minutes, but when I came back, my mother's rental car was gone, and so was my son while my husband was still asleep. He was as shocked as I was they had gone. Tried my mother's mobile, but no answer. After 45 minutes of me becoming increasingly hysterical, I called the police, who came out very fast, and when I explained as above, took things seriously. 6 hours later, my mother pulled back up and started telling the police, most adults know English here, that I had told her she could take my son out for the day. I'm currently 6 months pregnant, and she said it must be pregnancy brain, which the police seemed to accept and acted like the matter was closed since my son was home safely and showing everyone the toys he'd been bought. I told my mother to leave and that I never want to see her again. She started telling family I kicked her out for no reason, and she can't find a hotel, and they blew up my phone, to which I told them she had kidnapped my son, and I'm going to pursue this with the police. Now I'm being called an a-hole for saying my son was kidnapped when he was just taken on a day trip by his loving grandmother, and that an accusation like this could affect my mother's job as a nurse. Comments said, kidnapping is taking a child out of the custody of their legal guardian without permission or justification. That's literally the definition of what your mother did. She kidnapped your child. There are, a lot of laws against that. And it should affect her work as a nurse. There are rules about nurses not being kidnappers for a reason. They must be able to be trusted with people who are vulnerable, and kidnappers are untrustworthy. Another comment said, not the a-hole. Also, you should press charges and make sure a restraining order is put, cause it's only going to get worse from there. This was a kidnapping of a small child and should be taken with the utmost seriousness.
The next one is an entitled people story.
Hello y'all, long-time lurker, first-time poster. My boyfriend's power's out, so I have no one else to vent to, so please listen to my tale of woe. I work at a car dealership as a receptionist, one of my duties being greeting customers when they enter. I'm a professional artist on the side, and I've been busy with some commissions lately, so since it's not busy at the dealer, I started working on my iPad mini. It's old, and I'm working on upgrading, but I currently can't afford to, so I live with it despite the battery life being really short, and I have to basically keep it plugged in at all times. During my lunch, I was in the waiting area doing more work when a kid, a little girl no older than 4, came up and watched me work. This happens a lot when I draw in public, and usually the kids just ask a lot of questions. But this NG, nice girl, was very quiet and just had a look of amazement, so I just let her be. Her mother, the EM in the story, was nearby at a salesman's desk working on purchasing a new car, which is a long and no doubt boring process. The salesman working with her walked away, which at my dealership they do very often to retrieve paperwork, talk to the sales/finance managers, etc. She looks over to me and her kid and asks her, "What are you looking at?" Her kid points at my screen and says, "She's painting puppies." I was working on Twitch emotes of a streamer's dog. I sort of show my screen to EM and she then asks her kid if she wants to draw, which the girl excitedly said yes. I expected EM to pull out a paper and pencils, or at least ask me if I can get some for her too. But she just looked at me expectantly. When I realized she was waiting for me to hand her my iPad, I said, "Oh, she can't use mine, but I can get her a notepad and pens." But apparently that wasn't good enough. She sighs and says, "Just let her draw a little bit. I'm almost done here anyway," which I knew for a fact wasn't true. They were waiting on bank approval for a loan, which can take anywhere between 5 to 30 minutes. And even then, they'll be here longer for finance paperwork, detailing, etc. I start to explain that this is part of my work, and she scoffs, saying I'm just doodling puppies, and it was selfish that I wouldn't let NG doodle on my device too. Poor NG was just looking at her hands, looking quite embarrassed. I then pretended my lunch was over and got up to spend the rest of my lunch at my desk. I couldn't see her behind a huge truck on display, but I can hear her grumble to NG about who knows what. Whatever. Pretend like I didn't hear so I don't mess up the sale for my coworker. Sometime later, Nature called me, and I got up to use the restroom. I left my iPad on my seat so it'll stay plugged in, and put a notepad over it to try to cover it up somehow. My desk is a wide crescent shape with no drawers to keep my things safe, so this was the best I could do to somewhat hide it. I was in the restroom no longer than 3 minutes, but when I got back, only my charger remained. My iPad and Apple Pencil were gone. I looked over to the lady, who had her large purse suspiciously in her lap now instead of on the floor beside her chair like it was before. I was panicked because a lot of my work is on that iPad that I needed. I went to my sales manager, SM, and told him the situation. He told me he would take care of it, but to be patient for now. I went back to my desk full of anxiety and my stomach doing backflips. SM went to the desk where EM was to work out the deal. They're far enough that I can hear their voices, but not pinpoint what they're saying. But I did hear her eventually yell, "How dare you! I would never steal! Do you want to lose this sale?" I immediately got up and went over behind the lady so SM could see me, but she couldn't. He tells her he understands, but my iPad went missing and he wants to make sure no one currently in the building has it. That's when I remembered the Find My feature on all Apple products. My iPad was connected to the dealer's Wi-Fi, so I pulled out my iPhone and pressed play sound for my iPad. Her purse started dinging. She tried to play it off as if it's her ringtone, and SM stared at her, as if daring her to answer it. Thing is, with the play sound feature, if I keep pressing it, it will keep pinging. I made my presence known and told her to give my iPad back. That's when she stopped playing dumb and just said, "Just let NG have it. Her birthday is coming up and I can't afford a present for her since I'm getting this car." SM said he was happy to cancel the deal so she can instead buy a birthday present for her child, and to return my iPad or he'll call the police. She practically threw my iPad at me, where it hit me in the gut, and took NG from the waiting area to leave. Poor thing looked at me with the most apologetic look on her face before leaving with her mother. SM might have helped me, but he's not exactly the nicest person. From now on, I'm not allowed to bring my iPad to the dealer. I have to either leave it in my car or leave it at home. Whatever. EM took my Apple Pencil with her since she left in a hurry, so I'm gonna stop by the Apple store after work to get a new one. But until then, I'm stuck with my pens and notepad. Update. Hi all. It has been a stressful and anticlimactic week. I came back to work on my day off on Monday to talk to the police. EM apparently doesn't live in the country. She came here to try to buy a car that isn't available in her area, so they had to reach out to the police department there to talk to her. They took my info and told me to fill out a police report online so they can get started, which I did. The next day, the shooting in Texas happened. Rest in peace, those little angels. So, the police assigned to my case deemed it not important enough and placed it on hold to do a 2-day shooting drill that commenced the following day, Wednesday and Thursday. I finally got word back yesterday, on Saturday, that the EM has been contacted and told to either give the pencil back or be charged with theft. I don't know what her reaction was, whether she went to the police or they went to her, or what kind of conversation they had, but I do know she handed over the pencil. 2 of her country cops just came into the dealer a few moments ago and gave me my pencil. They then told me that next time, if I can do it myself, then confront the EM myself, and I was capable of doing so because of the info we had of her. However, they did say that they can proceed with the charges for theft if I wish to do so, but say I should think about her child and that she returned the pencil anyway. Honestly, guys, I don't want to make this political, but at this point, I was exhausted and did not want to deal with the police or anyone in the legal system further. I just thanked the cops, offered them coffee, and sent them on their way. I really don't know if that was the proper procedure for police work or if we're all stressed because of what happened on Tuesday. I live in a dominantly Hispanic area, and the tragedy hit us all exceptionally hard. I don't even have the energy to be angry anymore. I'm just really tired and happy to have my pencil back. Now I have 2. I'll probably give my newer one to my little cousin, who wants to follow me in my art footsteps. She doesn't have an iPad, but her sister does, so maybe she can let her use it on it. I don't know. I wish I had a more juicy and righteous story about how EM was arrested and paid me money because of a stupid decision she made, but the tragedy humbled me to my core. All I have to say now is, take care of yourselves. I love you, and thank you for reading. The next story is titled, Burglar Calls the Cops Because the Homeowner Wasn't Doing Things Right. This story is actually narrated to me by a friend of mine and is a quick tale about how she turned the tables on a home invader. At the time this happened, my friend was raising her child by herself in a suburb of Texas. The area they lived in wasn't particularly safe with wild beasties of both human and animal kinds, so friend armed herself with a small pistol and took some gun safety classes to protect her small family. The years go by, child is now 5, and there was a series of break-ins in the neighborhood, so friend hired a security company to install security cameras around her home. One day, while reviewing footage, friend noticed a strange man lurking around the house. He seemed to wander around a bit and then wandered away, so friend shrugged and carried on with her day. Nothing to worry about, right? Turns out, she was wrong. A few days later, friend was working in her home office and saw the same guy walking down her driveway, opened the gate, and entered her backyard. Friend realized the kitchen door was open. Child was playing in the living room. Friend grabbed her gun from her purse and ran to the kitchen, and got there as the guy calmly walked through her back door. Guy sauntered in, looked around the room, to see friend standing there with her gun pointed at him. Guy froze. Friend: "Who the duck are you, and why are you in my house?" Guy gulped, grabbed his phone, and dialed 911. "Help! I'm standing in this kitchen and some crazy idiot has a gun pointed at me." Friend was stunned, but didn't put her gun down while calmly telling child to go play in their room, then stood there, not moving while staring down the guy, who refused to leave. Guy: "You're gonna get it when the cops show up, idiot." Friend: "You are in my house. Get the duck out." Guy actually stayed standing there until the police came into the kitchen. Guy saw the cops and started screaming, "Arrest her! She's crazy! Look, she has a gun on me!" Friend put down her gun and started shaking. "This is my house. You broke in." Cops stopped and stared, looked at the guy. "You broke in?" Guy: "Well, her door was open and she pulled a gun on me. That's not how it works. Arrest her for having a gun." Friend: "I have a license, and this is Texas, you idiot." Cops arrested the guy, who was still howling how friend didn't do it right. Apparently, she wasn't a proper victim, LMAO. Friend gave the cops a copy of the video of him sniffing around earlier in the week. She never heard anything back from them, so she figured he went to jail. The next story is titled, "Entitled Business Owner Can't Use a School Computer and Loses His Only Chance to Get His Work Done." I was at the university before the semester started, working out some stuff for my classes. There was a line to see an advisor, and I'd been waiting in it for over an hour before I got to the front desk. While I was at the front desk, a man walked in and approached. He was told there was a line to see an advisor and to get in the back of it. At this point, dude looks at the man behind the desk and says, "I don't need an advisor, I just need the password to use the library computers." He's told that he can sign in using his student email and password. Lo and behold, he's not a student. "I'm a business owner, and I have accounts to handle and need a computer to do that. Blah, blah, blah." They tell him that unfortunately he's not a student and won't be able to access the school computers. He's super entitled, refuses to listen, and keeps insisting they just give him a random username and password so he can manage his accounts. At this point, I've been waiting open-mouthed for him to give up and go away since I've been waiting and it's my turn. He's still not listening, so I kindly decide to reiterate that non-students can't use the computers. I'm about to tell him that I have a laptop in my car and I'd be happy to let him use it. But he decides to fly off the handle at me, yelling that I'm a rude, inconsiderate bitch and that I need to learn to butt out and keep my nose in my own business. He's told again that it's not possible for him to use a computer and that harassing students will not be accepted. He doesn't stop, and security is called to escort him out. I finish with my advisor and start walking back out to my car, and this guy is still arguing with campus security. He sees me come out and starts harassing me again about how if I'd have kept my mouth shut, he could have used a computer. I couldn't help myself. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're not a student and can't use the school computers. I have a laptop in my car that I would say you could use, but since I'm such an inconsiderate biatch, I'm gonna drive away with my computer and you can suck on it. Bye-bye," with a happy smile and a sarcastic wave. It wasn't much, but the look on his face was priceless, and I left school laughing my ass off. The last story is titled, "Builders Who Have Yet to Learn the Definition of Irony." I popped into my local sandwich shop. There's a guy in a high-vis vest getting his order. As I reach the bread selection, he greets his friend, also in high-vis, who walks in the door. Very quickly, he jokes about having his Park Anywhere lights on. True enough, the big white van is parked directly outside of the shop on the road, and in the bus lane. The road is narrow, which is why there are many parking spots, and a car park, but this guy has still parked on the road in the way. They exchange some colorful language between them, complaining mostly about work as I make my order. I've ordered the kids' meal by this point, and the guy now behind me is agitated. He makes some comment about getting back to work. I ignore him. He gets a bit too close, leaning on the divider next to me. So I slow down, suddenly considering all my options. I act forgetful. I pull out the scrap of paper I had in my pocket. The guy behind me groans. Oh great, he's got a list. The woman behind the counter doesn't hear or doesn't care. I take my time, buy a few extra things, make sure to get them toasted. The woman obliviously plays along, gives me all my options to combine for a meal deal. Did I want an extra cookie? I consider them all, and get my order. The builder behind me is clearly agitated. I get my food and go. It feels like a bit of a win. I've wasted his time and gotten in his way. I doubt he realized why he lost his lunch break or that he was being selfish in what turned out to be a nearly empty street. But I felt better for it.
The next one is an entitled people story.
One day, I was working on the till, and doing just fine. It was a good day, as Snappy wasn't around, so I only had one asshat to deal with that shift. It was a slow day, and I had been using Snappy's till credentials to let her see the true reflection of a normal swipe rate. See previous revenge. And when I didn't have any customers waiting to be served, I made sure all the bits around the till were organized, clean, and looking good. The only big job around the till to keep clean and tidy was the medicine cabinet. It's a locked cabinet just below the till with medicines we advertised, but customers couldn't just pick up off the shelves as they were quite pricey, and we needed to advise them on the dosage, etc. But I took 30 minutes or so to clean the damn thing, making sure all the flea treatments were on one side, the calming remedies were on the other, and so on. There wasn't really enough space for everything, but I made it work so when anyone looked in the cabinet, they would be able to see every single label or front of a box to determine where anything is. I was a little proud of my work. Next thing I know, Messy came into the till area, on the phone with a customer I assumed, and went into the medicine cabinet. Now, Messy was not a lean guy. He was big, with huge arms, probably through lack of a proper diet and too many takeaways. And this cabinet was small, so I had a feeling I knew what he was going to do to find the product the customer was obviously asking for and got my pet pad out. Oh yeah, all of us worker bees had iPads called pet pads, which we would use for taking online orders, writing notes, checking off to-dos, etc. But there was also a camera function, which I decided to utilize that day. I got my pet pad out and set it to record video. Messy proceeded to put his left arm as far as he could on the inside of the cabinet and swipe to the right, and then forwarded to bring out every damn product in there. He hadn't even tried looking first like a normal person would. He just went full 1-year-old on the beautifully organized cabinet I just finished cleaning. I'd got it all on camera, and when he got off the call, having told the customer we don't have whatever they wanted in stock at the moment, he got up and told me to clean up the cabinet. I left the pet pad on record, although I didn't point the camera at him, I just needed the audio for this part, and told him I had finished cleaning the cabinet not 5 minutes before he came and swept everything out before even attempting to search inside. He said he didn't care, and ordered me to clean it, even pointing at the mess all over the till floor area. I then stopped recording on the pet pad, smiled, and said thank you, and to hold the tills down for a sec as I walked off towards the back of the store. I went into the office where Doormat was sitting, doing something on the computer. I showed him the video and told him I wanted to make a formal complaint about Messy, and I wanted that video to be included. Doormat did let the other managers run amok and walk all over him, but that recording must have taken the cake for him. He wrote up the complaint, downloaded the video, even let me take a copy for myself because I didn't trust it wouldn't get deleted, and filed it to head office. I got the rest of the shift on the tills in peace, as Doormat hauled Messy's ass inside, and from what I'd heard from other worker bees, he took him down a couple pegs. After seeing my complaint at head office, the big bad boss man above the managers, mentioned in the previous revenge, for that store visited us in person and chewed out Messy in front of the entire staff for 20 minutes, lectured the managers on how we treated each other as a staff family, and how conduct like that, proceeds to show the whole staff of the video I recorded, will not be tolerated. I have never been so vindicated in my life. I got many pats on the back from the worker bees after that meeting, and let me tell you, Messy and Snappy always watched where my hands were going every time they pulled their daily BS around me to make sure I wasn't reaching for my pet pad. The next story is titled, Entitled Mom Tells Her Friends She Owns My House and Lets Random Kids Swim in the Pool. For a little backstory, I live in a nice house. It's right on the beach and I take good care of it and my garden, so it's not strange to see people admiring my home. I'm also a teenager and basically live alone. My dad and mom both work in other states and travel a lot, and my sister lives with her fiance. I can drive, do laundry, and can go grocery shopping, so this isn't too weird. I don't like driving, so I usually bike everywhere, and I have a pool in the backyard. On to the story. EM, entitled Mother, EK, entitled Kinder Egg, CF1, CF2, EM, Confused Friends, CT, Confused Twins. Okay, so I just had a long day at work and had a few groceries with me on my bike. I just want to take a nice hot shower, and I look like death in my fast food uniform. As I pull onto my street, I see a line of people blocking my driveway. Like, full blocking. I pull onto the sidewalk and start walking my bike towards the group. And I overhear CF1 talking about how happy she is for EM and how beautiful her new home is. I'm like, what? No house nearby was sold or is even on the market. So I try to pass to get to my garage. Me. Hey, can I get past, please? EM. Just go around. Can't you see we're busy? Me. I just need to drop my bike in the garage and then I'll be out of your way. I'm glad you like the house though. I try to take care of it. CF1. I think you might be confused. EM lives here. Me. No, this is my house. I live here. I don't know her. EM. You are obviously trying to break into my house. Get away before I call the police. Me. No, you need to leave. EM. I will not get off my property. At this point, I just push past and head towards the garage. That's when I hear the splashing. No one should be in the pool. I drop my bike and run to the backyard and see 3 kids swimming in my pool. Duck that. I raise my voice and tell them to get the F out. The CT both get out, but are obviously confused, but the EK stays in. EK. My mommy says I can swim. Go away, you idiot. Me. No, I am not responsible for you drowning. Get the hell out of my pool and off of my property. EM. Don't talk to my angel that way. It's his pool. CF1. EM, what's going on? Who is this girl? EM. She is trying to rob me. Get the F out, kid. Me. I'm panicking at this point. Well, prove it. Prove that you live here, huh? CF2. EM, why don't we go inside? The kids shouldn't be here for this argument. Me. Like hell you're going into my home. EM. Yes, we're going inside. Now go away, girl, before I call the police. Me. Fine. I dare you to get in. The group climbs the stairs. Obviously, EM didn't think this through. Only 2 keys to this house exist. My key and my sister's. I lock up my bike, grab my groceries, and push past EM. She is making excuses to her friends about why the key doesn't work. Me. Excuse me, if you don't mind, I'm going into my house. CF2. EM, what's going on? I close the door and lock it as EM is banging on my door, screaming about how she is going to call the cops. I called the cops, not her. She ran off as soon as she saw the cop cars, and the friends stayed behind, very confused. They explained that EM had told them that this was her house and that they were just going to swim in the pool and then head to the beach so they would never go in the house. Later on, no charges are pressed on EM. I hope she learned her lesson. The next story is titled, Want to Throw Staff Under the Bus? Watch it fall back onto your family. I worked 5 years as a warehouse manager in a building that the head office was right above us. I worked with a CSR, let's call him J, and his father worked in the warehouse, let's call him L. We had a team of 30 people in the warehouse, and we had just had our online business active for about 1 year now. Before that, our main source of business was picking transfers for stores and just stocking the stores. We finally opened the online part of our business, this is back in 2015, so we would also sell similar products on the web. The problem is that if a store got all the product picked of one thing while a web order came in for the same, then we would be at a loss because we don't have enough for the customer. It would already be scanned by an employee and packed on a skid. Not worth digging an hour to find a $10 product. Anyhow, J and L were both infamous for throwing people under the bus for their own personal gain. It almost seemed that they would do it whether it was personal gain or not. They were just lowlives, the people I would consider losers. They both worked in the business for 10 plus years, and they were both entry-level positions since they were toxic and non-promotable. One time, I get into a meeting upstairs organized by my boss, CFO, the customer service manager, and the 3 CSRs. It turned out to be kind of an ambush because Jay walked in with a stack of paperwork. I was new at the time, about 4 months into the job. We talked about the online business and where we did well, but ultimately where we fell short. Jay then dropped the stack of paper pointed at me and said, "This is a stack of issues that your staff have done in the past year." Literally a list of things even from before I was employed. He basically said that the warehouse didn't know what they were doing, as the stack included mispicks, incorrect quantity shipped, and other issues. I had said this is the first time I've heard of any issues. Why would we not bring the issues up one by one so we can fix the concern or see where the issue lies and address it to correct future ones, rather than wait for them all to pile up and become more issues? I said this, and then said, "So wait, you were intentionally holding off on information that could have helped this business so you can collect enough data to try to make someone lose their job instead?" Jay said, "Someone should be fired for this." CFO quickly disagreed, but I said, "You know what? I will have to look at these issues and address with staff." So I took the stack and went downstairs. I found something interesting. No issues were brought up about specific errors from the department L works at, his dad. So I went and asked the CFO if Jay could provide me details on each department, specifically Department 35 and 40, which were our laboratory and LTL shipment business. Both are L's position. Eventually, Jay took a week, so I had the CFO ask again. He gave me a few issues, but tried to sugarcoat it. The thing is, Jay had given me a few small issues with a customer we don't deal with anymore. Apparently, this customer dropped us as we had tons of logistical issues. So I called the customer and said I was a new manager trying to find ways to improve and wanted to know what happened. When the customer happily gave me a list of issues, I found it was all L that created the errors. In fact, we lost 3 high-valued customers due to it. So I went to the CFO and got approved to terminate with a bare minimum package. Jay and L lived together. L was the person paying for the mortgage. When Jay found out I was terminating his dad, he came to me and talked to me personally about it. He said, "Listen, my intent wasn't to get anyone terminated. It is simply to make sure we function well as a company." I said, "Jay, I appreciate your concern, but you made it very clear in the meeting that someone needs to lose their position, and I found several issues where an employee had clearly made us lose 3 high-value customers, and he is still creating issues to this day." Jay said, "Okay, but termination is a stretch." I said, "I don't know how you found out I was going to possibly terminate someone in the first place, but I do what I must to simply make sure we function well as a company." I played dumb that I didn't know they were related, to the point where after I had terminated L and officially was told they were son and father, I had gone to Jay and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know you two were related. If I had known, then I would see why you were hiding information on the department intentionally." Over my time there, Jay had tried to do the same thing, and I eventually got him to a final written warning based on staff harassment. He still works there as a CSR. Will never move up in the company. Has his age capped. I don't enjoy terminating individuals, especially when it's a parent who needs to provide for their family. But this duo, duck them. The last story is titled, "Coworker Tried to Steal, Almost Got Away with It Till She Pissed Me Off." I work at a veterinary clinic, and as you may assume, it gets very busy. I typically have the role as a veterinary nurse, but help my coworkers when I can. I was helping clients at our front desk because it was slammed and there was only one receptionist. A coworker stormed up front, got real rude with me, and said she needed help in the treatment area. Cool. I will absolutely help, but I wanted to finish my task, and I certainly don't appreciate the attitude about helping someone else, so I snapped back and we idioted at each other for a minute. Fast forward to the evening, this same coworker who had no right to be a dick earlier had also used flea medications for her cat that was in today. She didn't put it on her invoice and specifically said anything that costs money she didn't want to get today. So she planned on just not paying for it. I didn't honestly care too much because it's inexpensive and the cat needed the meds, so I ignored it. Well, because she decided to be an a-hole, I asked our receptionist if that medication got put on the invoice, knowing the answer was going to be no. Amazingly enough, it wasn't on there when they looked. So, of course, the doctor puts it on the invoice and they try to charge the card on file. It paid for a whole 4 cents, and we were all there watching her card decline on the computer screen. The receptionist calls coworker and she says she doesn't have the money to pay for it. If she doesn't pay it, it will now go into collections. If my office manager catches wind she had no intentions of paying for it, she very well could get written up or fired. My manager and I are having a meeting on Monday, and it just may come out that she had no intentions of paying for it. The same person stealing from the company is supposed to be a shift lead and then interim manager when my manager goes on maternity leave. This, friends, is why you don't treat your coworkers like crap. I am thrilled at the petty slip-up of her attempting to steal from the workplace. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.